Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of Vengeful Vegas, True Crime in Sin City. I'm your host, Bonnie.
And I'm Janice.
And before we get into the story, we just want to let you all know that this week's episode was recorded while Janice was sick. So you might notice her voice being a bit off at times. And there were a few more than normal accidental mic bumps caught in our recording. So please forgive us while we continue to navigate this new adventure of podcasting. Now, before we get into the story, Janice is going to tell you about an active missing persons case.
This week's missing person is a 15-year-old girl by the name of Brianna Perez Contreras. She has been missing since Wednesday, December 3rd, so she's been missing for over a month. She was last seen in the area of North Tenaya and West Smoke Ranch in the Las Vegas Valley. She is described as a Hispanic female with brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing a black sweater with jeans and gray Croc shoes. Her family is extremely worried about her, as this is not something she is known to do, which is leave for days at a time without contacting anyone. Everyone is hoping that she is out there and she is safe, and she has just chosen to walk away from her loved ones for whatever reason. And if that's the case, and if she is somehow listening to this podcast, Brianna, please get a hold of your parents. They just want to know that you're okay. There have been many searches, and the Las Vegas Metro Police Department have used a lot of resources to try to find her, but there has not been any sightings. So if you know anything about Brianna's whereabouts, please contact the Las Vegas Police Department at 702-828-3111 or Nevada Child Seekers at 702-458-7009. Please help us bring Brianna home.
Today's episode of Vengeful Vegas is about the October 1993 robbery of Circus Circus by Heather Tallchief and Roberto Salas. Heather was born in Buffalo, New York in 1972. 2 years later, sometime after her younger sister Elaine was born, Heather's parents got a divorce. In a strange turn of events, their drug and alcohol addict father, Fred, ended up getting custody of Heather and Elaine. Their mother must have been in a much worse condition than their father for their father to end up with both kids. However, a few years later, when Heather was around 8 years old, her father ended up getting sober and clean from drugs and remarried. He and his new wife had 4 more children together. I imagine this was a pretty difficult childhood to have. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household that was free of drugs and alcohol and physical abuse. I don't know if Heather was physically abused, but I have heard and read a lot of stories from people that weren't so fortunate. And this kind of home life can be really sad and difficult, and it causes a lot of long-term emotional trauma. As a teenager, Heather attended a Catholic high school, but that didn't prevent her from going through a gothic phase, according to her younger sister, Elaine. Elaine absolutely idolized her older sister. Everything Heather did, Elaine wanted to do as well. Elaine recalls that even when Heather got a new hairstyle, she wanted the same hairstyle so that she could, quote, get a little taste of what it was like to be her.
Did you ever do that with your sisters?
I don't think so. I liked to be in my sister's room when they were doing their hair and their makeup. It was a lot of fun spending time with my sisters, but I don't think I ever wanted to be exactly like any of them.
Like you didn't want their haircut?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I don't have any sisters, so I can't say anything about ever wanting to be like them. I definitely never wanted to be like my brother, so.
No. I think that would be kind of weird. Understandable, but kind of weird. Elaine also describes her big sister Heather as a trendsetter and a leader. When Heather was around the age of 20, she moved to San Francisco and got a nursing job as an assistant in the Kimberly Quality Care Center AIDS Hospice. So the combination of working at a hospice with terminal cancer and AIDS patients, on top of having like a slightly abusive, as Heather describes it, relationship with an unknown man. I don't know what his name was.
How is a relationship slightly abusive?
I don't know. Maybe he lightly gaslighted her, or maybe he hit her occasionally.
Maybe this was back before BDSM was like
Oh
an
gosh,
okay thing.
I don't know. Maybe. She never goes into detail as to what constituted as abusive, but she ended up getting into drugs, and she told her mom that she was depressed. So around like 14 months after she started working at the hospice, she ended up ending her relationship with her boyfriend, and she lost her job at the hospice. I don't know if she quit.
Did she end the relationship?
I don't know. I don't know if she broke up with him or if he dumped her. I don't know what the situation was. So around the time she was 21 years old, which was not long after her losing her job at the hospice and ending the relationship.
Do you think she might have lost her job because she was stealing meds from this hospice?
You know, that's a possibility. I don't want to point fingers and say she did for sure. There's nothing concrete to say she did or didn't, but typically from when people are addicted to drugs and they have access to drugs through their work, unfortunately it does happen. So I don't know. I don't want to say for sure, but she could have been stealing from the hospital. I'm hoping that she just got, I mean, it's not really a better alternative, but I'm hoping she just got so depressed from the job that she quit for her mental health's sake. And maybe she broke up with her boyfriend for her mental health or her physical well-being, or maybe he ended things with her because she was depressed. You know, it's all up for interpretation. I personally couldn't have a job at a hospice. I am too empathetic of a person, and being around constant death would absolutely push me into a depression. If I ever had absolutely to work in a hospice, I would have to be the type of person that very clearly was there just for work. I wouldn't be able to form relationships with the people because I would just be in a constant state of depression watching these people die. It's way too difficult. For a long time, I wanted to get a job like as a nurse for a hospital, but even as I got to understand what the job is, I decided that was too much for me. I instead got licensed as a phlebotomist, which is poking people and drawing their blood. And in the healthcare industry, people typically call them vampires. So I got licensed as a vampire.
I always thought about myself as a vampire, but because I was working nights at the casinos, like I rarely saw the daylight.
Well, and you're pale enough, so.
That too. I suck your blood.
I suck your blood. So hospice work is out of the question for me. So anybody that does that for a living, God bless you, because the world needs people like you. Around the time Heather was 21, so same time frame where she lost her job at the hospice, she would go to bars, and one time when she was at the bar, she met a man named Roberto. And she immediately found him attractive and very interesting. She sat and chatted with him. And a bit of information about Roberto: he was 48 years old at the time that Heather met him.
And she was 21, right?
Yeah.
Dude, that's more than double her age.
Yeah, it's a big age gap. When you're the younger individual in a relationship with that kind of an age gap, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. I know because I've been there with an 11-year age gap.
Nowhere near the same thing, but still, it's quite the age gap, especially when the younger person is that young of an age.
Right. Like, for an older man, I'm sure it's a flex to be with a 21-year-old woman. But
yeah, it reminds me of from our last episode, Mo Sedway and his wife. He was 41 and she was 17.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, it boggles my mind.
Yeah.
There's such a generation gap with those things. It personally doesn't work for me. If it works for you, awesome. Doesn't work for me. But Roberto, I think in Heather, mostly he found someone that he could manipulate into doing what he wanted. So they sat and chatted at the bar after they met, hung out for a few hours, and then they went back to Roberto's place. And when they got there, Heather walked in the door, and right there in his living room, she saw an altar that was set up, this religious altar. And it wasn't like Mother Mary and baby Jesus type of altar. It was, here, let me give you the quote. She said, quote, "It was so spectacular. It had all of these things on it, like a goat's skull and candles and incense and crystals. And he had 2 chalices, and one was full of red liquid, and the other one was white. I mean, there had to be something behind that, so I had to find out."
And that's spectacular?
Apparently. I mean, if you look at her background and upbringing,
But she went to Catholic school. How is this... How does she not see this as creepy?
Yeah, but she was like Gothic when she was in Catholic school. So She wasn't really into the whole Catholic scene. I think she went because she was told to. Again, speculation, but you know.
Yeah. I mean, you go where your parents tell you to go.
Yeah, you do. So Heather asked Roberto what was going on with the chalices, and he told her that the white liquid was goat's milk and that the red liquid represented blood.
That seems odd. Are you sure it's representing blood? It's not actually blood?
That, according to the interview, that's what she said. She said it represented blood, and specifically menstrual blood, because it represents birth. And the goat's milk represents the nourishment the body needs for physical growth. So this altar is representation of like birth and life.
Okay. I mean, did they drink this stuff?
I don't think so. I think they were just there as like an altar, just there for visual.
I just want to know, like, how often do you change out the milk and the blood? Because I know that the milk is going to go
sour
sitting out pretty quickly. I don't know how long blood takes to ferment, but milk does not take that long.
Well, if it were blood clots. Like, it'll get like chunky and clotted. It'll separate. So it'll get really yucky. Just working with blood.
Hey, you learned something in your phlebotomy classes.
Yeah. Later on that evening, Roberto asked Heather if he could read her tarot cards. Roberto read Heather tarot cards, and he said that one card was representative of fortune, and the other card was the temptress, or the lust card. So Heather goes on to talk about how she was incredibly fascinated by Roberto's religious beliefs, and she felt this like really strong calling to follow him, particularly after this tarot reading. She took this tarot card reading very seriously, and she interpreted this reading as her calling to follow Roberto in his religious journey.
So was she still on drugs? She was still like super high at this point, right?
I have no idea.
I'm assuming because she lost her job and then she met him like pretty soon after. So
right.
If it's the first time she's gone to his apartment and he's like doing these things, I would think that she is drunk, high, or both. And so like that's just making her want to know even more because she's in that vulnerable mental state when this is happening.
Right. That makes sense. There's no record of her that I can recall. There was no record of her mentioning that she had gotten clean from alcohol or drugs at this time. And quite honestly, she met him at a bar. So
yeah,
minimum, she had alcohol in her system. But you don't have to have alcohol in your system to be fascinated by a religious belief.
That's true.
Something about it just called to her. So the part for me is...
The part, are you referring to their age?
No. Okay, so...
Oh, the sexy part.
Yeah. Roberto went on to tell Heather about these sex magic rituals that he engaged in. And this sex magic was like a physical and spiritual ritual where you use this ritual to manifest ideas, wills, powers, and energies. And Heather talks about how during these sex magic rituals, and I imagine they're having sex while this happens, she would call on goddesses to take over her body. And I imagine that they were on drugs at the time because that would make the experience more potent.
They drank from the chalices.
Possibly. So it's just a very, very foreign religious experience than what I'm used to. So I'm like super Mormon. So this is like left field for me. So after learning this about Roberto, having these tarot card readings, this massive age gap where when you're the younger half of a relationship, I know I personally, and from experiences and accounts I've heard, the younger half tends to look up to, and they try to impress the older partner. They try to do things that will gain them acceptance from the older partner. And Heather actually talks about this. She talks about how she wanted his approval. So she was willing to do whatever he wanted for this approval. And Heather ended up falling very deeply in love with Roberto, and she trusted him completely. So about 2 weeks after this meeting and Roberto completely gaining Heather's love and trust, he decided to divulge his shady past to her. Back in 1969, Roberto and a couple of other men decided to rob an armored truck at a Woolworth's store in San Francisco. So Roberto demanded the driver hand over money or give him access to money. And the driver was a 61-year-old man named Louis Dake. And he showed Roberto he had absolutely no money in the cash bag. Roberto decided that, okay, fine, I don't want you to report me to the police. And he shot and killed this man.
So just randomly? Or like, was this like a plan or?
This was a plan. He planned this with some other men and it went very poorly. He killed the driver and ended up getting caught and sent to prison.
Oh.
Interestingly, he got sentenced to life in prison.
That didn't obviously work.
Yeah. However, as we both know, he's out running around free with Heather.
So this was before Heather.
This was before Heather.
Oh, okay.
This was back in 1969.
Oh, that's a good year.
Yeah. Right.
So that was 3 years before she was born.
So during Roberto's imprisonment, he escaped, like jailbreak, and then he got caught and sent back to prison. So then during the next 24 years in Folsom Prison in San Francisco, he used this time to write books and poetry, but he did it under the alias Pancho Aguila. And I think he did it under a pseudonym for anonymity. I mean, that's typically why people use pseudonyms.
Well, I know nowadays, I don't know about back then, but I know now if you're incarcerated and you want to like write a book or sell art or something, like you don't have any of the rights to any of those things. Like you cannot make money off of your things while you're incarcerated. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, interestingly, Roberto had like 30 different aliases. This was just one of his 30 aliases.
That's a lot.
I don't know what he was using these for. It could have been.
How do you even keep track of them?
I don't know.
Dude, I can't even remember all of the names of the people that I work with every day.
Sometimes I forget my name when people ask me, so I couldn't keep track of 30. Apparently, he wasn't very good at it either because he kept ending up in jail. He was in and out of jail in San Francisco a lot.
So he had the life sentence, then he escaped, and then he got back in. So then how did he get out?
So he spent 24 years in prison, wrote poetry, wrote books, and gained like a really solid reputation among the guards and prisoners. And so when he went to the parole board, he had people vouching for him. Like, oh, he's got a great character and he's totally reformed. Like he had people vouching for him. So they let him out on parole.
Like guards that were vouching for him?
Yeah. So he got a life sentence, but in 1991, well, between 91 and 92, he was released on parole.
Even though he escaped?
Yeah.
That boggles my mind.
Yeah, so he murdered someone, got caught, sent to prison,
Oh my God.
escaped, got caught and sent back, spent 24 years in the prison, and then was released on parole. So then he continued to live in San Francisco, but he changed his name, or what I should say is he lived under the alias Julius Suave.
As far as nicknames, that doesn't sound terrible. Kind of makes you sound like a little sexy there.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Was he suave?
Right, that's what I thought. Well, he obviously didn't introduce himself that way to Heather because she knew him as Roberto. So Roberto discloses this shady past to Heather, and because she's so infatuated by him, she said, "I recall thinking that the murder of the truck driver was an accident and an unfortunate incident that Roberto regretted, and that he had changed his life since then." You don't get much more naive than that. So, according to Murderpedia, Heather and Roberto moved to Mexico shortly after this, where they started preparing for this major heist that was coming up for the Circus Circus.
Where in Mexico?
It doesn't say. And honestly, I'm really skeptical about this account of them moving to Mexico because according to an interview Heather did with NBC News, she allegedly had no idea that Roberto wanted to try robbing an armored truck again. The day that it happened, it completely blindsided her. So she says.
I thought you just said they planned for a heist.
Roberto did before Heather was born, but this one, there's one account where they moved to Mexico. They planned for a heist. But according to an interview she did with NBC News, she said she had no idea he wanted to do another heist. So there's conflicting information out there is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know if she knew about it or not.
Oh, okay.
But I'm going to go with the interview she did with NBC News and assume she didn't know about the heist that was coming up.
Okay.
So allegedly, she had no idea that they were going to be robbing an armored truck again. In 1993, Roberto suggested to Heather that they move to Las Vegas together. And Heather asked him, well, why Las Vegas? Roberto said, I'm feeling kind of lucky. So she's like, all right, fine. So she assumed that he just wanted to go to Vegas and gamble and make money gambling.
That's a reasonable assumption.
So when they got to Vegas, Roberto, I assume, couldn't apply for a job.
Well, if he was on parole in California, how was he even able to cross the state line?
Okay, so that is probably why he couldn't apply for a job. I mean, he could have used one of his aliases.
So he left. He did more illegal stuff before the illegal stuff we're going to hear about.
Yeah. His whole life is illegal stuff. So they moved to Vegas, and Roberto suggested to Heather that she get a job. So they went out and got job applications, and she's filling out job applications. And Roberto says, hey, how about you fill out an application for Loomis?
What's Loomis, for the listeners that don't know?
Loomis is the armored truck company. So if she filled out a job application for Loomis and got the job, she would be an armored truck driver or passenger. And Heather was really hesitant to fill out an application for Loomis because she had no qualifications. She didn't even have a driver's license. So Roberto, you should really fill out an application for Loomis. And she's like, oh, okay. So she filled out an application for Loomis and got the job, which then she, I think, got a driver's license afterwards.
So she didn't have a driver's license when she applied to be a driver?
Yeah, but she got the job, so, I mean...
Usually you have to, put your driver's license number on an application if you're going to be driving.
I guess not back in 1993. So Heather, when she was filling out this job application, according to the interview, she claims she didn't suspect any ulterior motives by Roberto suggesting she apply for Loomis, which is why I have a hard time believing that they conspired together to do this heist. Everything she says in this interview points to her not having any idea that it was going to happen. So Heather gets the job, and over the next 2 months, Roberto would, according to Heather, play what she describes as hypnotic videos to her before she would go to work. So before she would go to work, she would sit and he would play these hypnotic videos for her. She said she doesn't remember what the videos were about, but, quote, a man's voice came in, and then the tape would go into a colorful swirl, and the voice would count from 10 to 1. Then I'd wake up, the tape would be finished. So it sounds like he was literally brainwashing her if this really happened. Every day when Heather got home from work, Roberto acted very interested in what her day was like. He would ask her all kinds of questions about her shift, very detailed questions. So Roberto was gathering information for this heist he had planned. So on October 1st of 1993, again, about 2 months after Heather started working for Loomis, Roberto decided to put his plan into action. He woke Heather up for her shift, gave her a very detailed description, very detailed instructions of what he wanted her to do that day during her shift at Loomis. He even had a map drawn out that led from Circus Circus, which was their first money drop location for that day, to a rented warehouse that he had disguised as an armored truck repair business. So if any armored trucks showed up,
I want to know where he got the money for this.
I don't know.
So he gave her these instructions in the morning and she just like read them and like, cool, I'll do that. How are you saying she had no idea? Or was his instructions like in one of those brainwashing videos?
I'm not totally sure. And Heather suspects that she was repeatedly given instructions during these brainwashing sessions that she had with these videos, but she just doesn't remember the videos. But I don't know specifically what the instructions were. She just says that he gave her very detailed instructions of what he wanted her to do that day, and so she didn't ask questions, she just did it because, like we were talking about before, she completely trusted him and she thought he had changed his life. And so I'm sure she was confused when he was telling her what he wanted her to do, but she went along with it because she was in love with him and she trusted him.
She didn't want to lose him.
Honestly, yeah. So Heather went to work as usual and she dropped off her couriers to fill the ATMs at the Circus Circus, which, like I said, was their first drop of the day. Mm-hmm. But instead of picking them back up at the rear entrance 20 minutes later, she just drove the truck away. Cash-filled truck. The interview said that the truck was filled 2/3 of the way with stacks of cash, tons of money. So she drove this cash-filled truck to the warehouse where Roberto was waiting for her, and her coworkers had no idea what was going on. After they filled the ATMs, they went looking for her, and they got really worried because armored trucks sometimes get robbed, and they thought something had happened to her.
Yeah. It is kind of one of those more dangerous security gigs. It's specifically something people want.
Yeah, I mean, the truck drivers carry guns.
Oh.
So
with her alcoholism and stuff, she was able to get a gun too?
I guess. She must have passed a drug test if they did it. So her partners called the office to see if she had shown up there or called there. They tried radioing her. They couldn't get a hold of her. So a new armored truck was sent down to pick her partners up. And they drove around looking for her to see if they could find her truck. Couldn't find her truck anywhere. Eventually, they got the police involved. They got the FBI involved. It was like this whole thing.
That quickly?
I think the FBI took a few days to get involved. It wasn't the same day.
Oh, okay.
But while everybody's looking for Heather, Roberto had forced Heather to hand over her gun. Like, he flipped a switch. She talks about how he was very suddenly extremely mean to her and very rude and was saying nasty things to her, very controlling, totally different. He took her gun, and at gunpoint, Roberto was forcing Heather to unload the cash from the truck into cardboard boxes, and then those boxes were going to be shipped to a secondary location.
Why did he have to point a gun at her for to do it? I mean, she was already like brainwashed by him, and why didn't he help her? It would have made it go faster.
I don't know. That's the same thing I keep going through my mind. He must have been so panicked that she was going to turn on him at this point. Again, it goes back to, in my mind, she couldn't have known what was happening that day until it started happening because he held her at gunpoint and made her unload the cash. So she had to have not known what was going to happen until it was happening, which is why he had her at gunpoint. He was like, okay, she's going to panic and rat me out, so I've got to really tightly control the situation. You know? That's my guess. That makes the most logical sense to me.
None of it makes sense to me, but continue.
Yeah, well. So the truck that Heather was unloading had $3.1 million in cash. That had to have taken forever to transfer into these cardboard boxes. I have no idea how long it would have taken, but that wasn't like a 10-minute job, you know what I mean?
It just reminds me of that pile of cash where you can like touch $1 million down on Fremont Street.
Is that a thing?
Yeah. Well, you never really went out in Vegas, but...
We went to Fremont Street with our kids.
It's inside of Binion's, I believe. Yeah, there's just this stack of cash, and you can, like, take a picture with $1 million. And so I have an idea of how much $1 million is.
So, once the truck was empty, which, again, probably took forever, Roberto very rudely told Heather to put on this disguise and to sit in a wheelchair and pretend that she was crippled.
What?
Yeah. So...
Did you still have her at gunpoint at this point?
It doesn't say, but I imagine so. So they chartered a private plane to Denver, Colorado. And then from there, they went to Miami for a short amount of time. And then they went to Amsterdam. It doesn't say what they did in Miami, but I imagine that's where they had the money shipped to.
Amsterdam would make a lot of sense for them being the druggies. And some drugs are legal in the Netherlands.
Oh.
Especially Amsterdam.
Well.
You can go to a coffee shop there. And a coffee shop in Amsterdam does not sell coffee.
Oh.
Yeah.
How do you know?
I've been to Amsterdam, so I don't do drugs, but being that I was like in Amsterdam, I was really tempted to try weed because I was there. But I also decided against it because I think trying drugs for the first time in a foreign country was not the best decision. So I chose not to do that.
I think that was a really good call on your part. Well done.
Sometimes I do things that you don't expect of me.
Very nice. Very good. Very good. So they slipped up when they were in Colorado. When Heather got off of the plane, she no longer acted like she was crippled. She stood up and walked off the plane and left the wheelchair behind. And understandably, this left an impression on the charter pilots. So when the FBI tracked down this plane that they took, the pilots were like, yeah, I remember them. She was crippled when she got on the plane, but she walked off just fine and left her wheelchair.
Miracles do happen. Hallelujah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so not a very smart move on their part. So the FBI were able to track them to Colorado because of that slip up. Up until then, all they had to go on was Roberto's fingerprints from Heather's apartment. The FBI also had found an address for them in Miami from Heather's apartment. I guess they had it written down somewhere. About 2 weeks after all of this had happened, they found Roberto's warehouse. And they found Heather's clothing that she had changed out of. They found the gun that they had left behind. So I guess she was no longer at gunpoint once they went to the airplane. And they found the cardboard mailing boxes. And a chunk of the money was, in fact, left behind. There was so much of it that Heather and Roberto couldn't take it all with them. They had left thousands of dollars behind. So I guess when I said that when the truck was empty, they left, but the truck wasn't actually empty. I think they felt like they were running out of time, and so Roberto was like, that's good enough, let's go. So despite thousands being left behind, they still ended up with millions of dollars. So Heather says that from the day of that heist on, she began to see a completely different side of Roberto. She describes it as an evil one. She no longer saw him as this spiritual leader in her life. She was now afraid of him. He was mean to her, and he no longer seemed to care for her the way that he once did. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I don't think that Roberto was looking for a love interest in Heather. I think he was looking for someone to manipulate and get him to help him to pull off this heist sometime down the road.
But this heist didn't happen that long after. It was less than 2 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So he knew for sure he was going to do this.
Yeah. I'm certain he was planning this for a while, and when Heather, so to speak, fell into his lap, he was like, yeah, perfect. So about a year after arriving in Amsterdam, Heather ended up getting pregnant with Roberto's child, and she said that she felt afraid and trapped, which makes perfect sense because she was afraid of him, and I'm sure that she wasn't telling him no, and so when she ended up pregnant, she didn't know what to do.
So, when did they get the money?
She doesn't really talk about that. I think when they were in Miami...
Did they ever get the money?
Oh, yeah, they got the money. They absolutely got the money.
Oh, okay.
She talks about how Roberto ended up with control of all of it. So she decided to keep the baby. About 2 months after the baby was born, she decided to take the baby and run. She says that she got enough pocket money and jewels to get by, and she left. Roberto seemingly never even cared enough to look for her. She waited and waited for him to come looking for her, and he never did. So she spent the next 10 years living under an alias, speaking with a fake English accent, working as a hotel chambermaid.
Chambermaid. This is in the 90s. A chambermaid sounds like way older. Or maybe it's just as the cultural thing, because she's not in the U.S.
Right. That must have just been what they called it in Amsterdam.
So she was still in Amsterdam when she left him.
Yeah, she stayed in Amsterdam and he just...
Didn't look for her, even though they were in the same city?
Yeah, he just didn't care.
Oh, well, he sounds like a winner.
Yeah. So Heather said that she never saw Roberto again. And she's actually convinced that he's dead because if he were still alive, she's sure he would have come looking for her or something. If he were still alive, he would be 75 years old right now. Heather talks about how her lifestyle became so depressing that she wanted to give herself up to the police in Las Vegas. She was tired of running. She was tired of having this secret life with her son. I imagine if she didn't have a son that it would have been a little bit easier to live under an alias, but she didn't want this life for her son. In fact, she spent years saving up money and making sure she was in a stable relationship so that she could turn herself in and leave her son with someone that she trusted. So when her son was about 10 years old, which was about 12 years after she was on the run, she contacted lawyers in Las Vegas, Daniel J. Albrechts and Robert M. Axelrod.
Axelrod's a cool name.
Yeah, I know, right?
That sounds like a really cool name for a lawyer, too.
Yeah, Axelrod.
Isn't that like an artist or something? Or is it a car part? I don't even know. It could be anything.
I know Axl Rose is Def Leppard.
Well, Axel. Oh, Axel. Oh, yeah. And an axle is a car part. But I don't know about an axle rod. An axle rod might be a car part. I don't know cars, in case you didn't know.
It sounds like a car part. So she told them her story, and then she decided to go back to the States. She left her son Dylan behind in Amsterdam with a trusted partner, and in fact, she dropped herself off at school and said something to the effect of, "Have a good day, I love you, and I'll see you later." So she came back to the States under the alias Donna Eaton. That's the name she had actually been living under in Amsterdam. She was living under the name of Donna Eaton. So she turned herself in.
So she dropped her son off and he had no idea he wasn't going to see her again for X number of years.
That's my understanding.
That would be such a terrible feeling to like get off of school and just be like, yeah, your mom's gone.
Yeah, it would be. I don't know if she was ready to have that discussion with them, so she just... Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe he did know, and she just wasn't making a big deal out of it when she dropped him off at school. I'm not totally sure.
Yeah.
So she turned herself in on September 15th, 2005, at the age of 33. She was my age, which just is very surreal to think about. She spent 12 years on the run, and she was finally able to confess and clear her conscience, give her son a better life, and make sure he was safe and taken care of while she was away. Her parents and her 13-year-old brother, Skylar was born after Heather had moved to San Francisco. So just a side note, she had gone back to visit her family the day her stepmom had her brother, Skylar.
So she has 5 step-siblings now?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
So Skylar wanted to see her and meet her, but her sister Elaine was still just very, very deeply hurt by Heather's abrupt disappearance and lack of contact over the years.
Oh, I totally forgot about Elaine.
Yeah, Elaine really looked up to Heather. Heather was her idol. And when Heather disappeared and went to Amsterdam with Roberto, Elaine didn't hear from her ever. Elaine had no idea what was happening. Her family was torn apart, thinking that she had gotten killed or kidnapped. They had absolutely no contact with her over the years. And
she never reached out in the 12 years she was on the run?
No, not once. So sad.
Why didn't she just move to Switzerland? Because then she could have got all of the contact that she wanted with them, because there's no extradition there.
Yeah, right. Switzerland is neutral ground.
I love Switzerland. They have really good cheese.
Oh, Swiss cheese, huh?
They're like my favorite country in the world for food, because I love their raclette. Raclette's like this cheese and potato dish. It's so good.
Oh, dude, Canada, they have the poutine, the French fries, and the gravy. Freaking delicious.
Every time I find poutine on a menu here in my area, because I am kind of close to Canada, sometimes we can get poutine around here. I always have to get it.
I love poutine. It's so good.
I think last time I went to Canada, I went for 3 days, and I think I had poutine like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, that's a reasonable amount. Bonnie approved. So Heather, obviously, pled guilty to the charges that were against her. and she served a 63-month sentence in prison.
How many years is 63 months? I don't like math.
She served a 5-year, 3-month prison sentence.
That's what she was sentenced to, or is that how much she actually, like, was in prison for?
That's how long she served.
Okay.
Then she got to be on parole from 2010 to 2015. And she also was sentenced to pay back the $2.9 million to Loomis, which, I mean, it's probably never going to happen.
I don't see that happening.
No, not going to happen, if we're being honest. But Heather stayed in the United States, and she's actually working in healthcare again. I don't know what she does, but she works in the healthcare industry, and I think it's her way of making amends to the universe for what she had done.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, I don't know how she lived when she was on the run, but obviously being in jail for that long, she got sober and clean, if she wasn't already.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah. So she's very close with her son, Dylan, now. He's 26, and he works in the music industry.
He was 10 when she went to jail, so he was 15, maybe 16 when she got out.
Good mathing. So Roberto is still missing. He's never been tracked down. We don't know if he's dead or alive.
Maybe he used one of those aliases, or maybe he had like 10,000 more aliases since then, because, I mean, he had 30.
It's possible. He wasn't very good at getting away with crime before he met Heather, but apparently once he met Heather, she was the linchpin and made things work.
He wasn't very good at getting away with stuff, but once he did get away with what he wanted, which seemed like it was money, he didn't feel the need to commit any more crimes because he got away with the one he wanted.
A lot of it. So I'm sure he was set for life so long as he didn't burn through all of it doing stupid stuff.
Which does happen to people.
If he hasn't been tracked down at this point.
Maybe he's on Epstein's Island.
Ew. So, that concludes this episode of Vengeful Vegas, True Crime in Sin City, and the story of how $3.1 million was stolen from Circus Circus.
Thanks for joining us.
And remember, safety isn't expensive, it's priceless.